When we left Ruth and Naomi last week, things were going pretty okay. Ruth had been going to Boaz's field and coming home with a lot more barley than anyone had any business getting from picking up the scraps and the leftovers, because Boaz was, of course, making sure his workers did a very sloppy job and left a lot of stuff for Ruth to pick up. So Ruth and Naomi have had plenty to live on. It just so happened that Boaz was a guardian redeemer or a kinsman redeemer for this family, and, well, it's his responsibility to make sure that Ruth and Naomi were provided for. So all things considered, after last chapter, things were going a lot better than they were after the first chapter. Instead of having nothing, they now had enough. But having enough wasn't enough for Naomi. She wanted more. She didn't just want to make sure they had enough food. She wanted to make sure she and Ruth were taken care of. So she came up with a plan. She tells Ruth to pretty herself up, to head down to the threshing floor where Boaz will be, to wait for him to get himself stupid drunk, and lie down in a grain pile. And then, when he lies down, for Ruth to go up, uncover his feet, and lie down there too. And then he will tell you what to do. Now, there's some debate among biblical scholars over just how scandalous Naomi's instructions are. They're either mostly scandalous or unspeakably scandalous, depending on how you want to interpret how these things went down. So even on the nice end of things, this is incredibly inappropriate for Ruth to do. But Naomi's got this plan. And it kind of feels like Naomi's telling Ruth, go convince this guy he slept with you so that he has to marry you. That's kind of what it sounded like. Now, a lot of times you read commentaries and they try to make it sound like Naomi is just being oh so pious here. And that Naomi is just, that Naomi's doing the right thing, that this is just an ancient marriage custom. But if you look at the place where Naomi's head is right now, she is anything but pious. She has faith in God right now, but her faith in God is that God will only do bad things for her. At the end of chapter 1, Naomi says, I went away full, but the Lord has returned me empty. Why would you call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has deemed me guilty? She is very upset with God at the moment. And the only thing she trusts God for is that God is going to do her wrong. So I can't see Naomi being in a place of piety at this point. She's trying to take matters into her own hands and make sure that she is secure. It's a neat word, that, secure, being secure, having security. We all like that, right? We like knowing that we'll be able to pay all our bills every month, and we like knowing that we're not going to have to stress about what's going to happen tomorrow. We like having that confidence. And a lot of times we have a really hard time trusting God to be our security, don't we? Like Naomi, we want to start taking matters into our own hands, and we start to think that, oh, well, if I just get all this stuff sorted out, then I can start trusting God. As long as I have my finances sorted out, then I can trust God. We think this way over and over again. But the people that I've come across that actually seem to trust God for their provision the most are the people with the least. The people with the least financial security seem to be the ones who most trust God to provide for them. And the people with more financial security seem to be the ones that are more worried about making sure they're financially secure. It's just one of those weird things. We like to make our own security, just like what Naomi is doing. And so because Naomi, having decided that God is not trustworthy, commands Ruth to do a scandalous thing. Now, Ruth, not wanting to disobey her mother-in-law, because that's a no-no, goes along with it, but as soon as Ruth and Boaz find themselves in their scandalous situation, they act appropriately in a scandalous situation. It's interesting. They're put in this situation. Naomi made this happen, but the way they behave is actually quite appropriate. Because when Ruth shocks Boaz awake in the middle of the night, Ruth immediately says, "This is who I am and this is what I want. I'm Ruth, your servant. Be a redeemer to me. Save my family." Then Boaz is quite open to the proposal, is willing to marry Ruth to redeem her and Naomi, and he even makes sure that when Ruth leaves, she leaves at just the right time, that it won't bring scandal on either of them. In some translations, it says to leave at the time when one person cannot recognize another, which is just a great description because we all pretty much know what time that is, right? When it's just light enough that you can see somebody, but not so light that you can tell what it is. Usually I have this problem with my dog. We have dark-colored carpets, and she's a black dog, and there's a certain time when you're walking around and you're going to trip over her because she blends in. But then Boaz says this thing really offhand. There's another relative who is closer to Naomi than Boaz is. Naomi's plan just completely fell apart. Everything, and when we make plans for ourselves, doesn't that often happen? We plan for every contingency, but then as soon as when something happens, it's always one of the things we didn't plan for. That happens to me a lot anyways. I try to make everything fit into place so that everything just goes perfect, but then something comes in sideways and it's the one thing that I didn't expect. Because that's what happened in Naomi's plan. As soon as Boaz mentions this closer redeemer, everything that she wanted fell apart. Because Boaz isn't the one who has first dibs, so to speak. There's somebody else. There's somebody else who has a better claim to be the redeemer than Boaz does. And we can all think of times in our lives when those curveballs have come in, things that we just, well, that's the one thing I didn't expect. I had that when I graduated from college and was telling God what I was going to do. My plan was, I graduated as an electrical engineer. Electrical engineers make pretty good money, even right out of school. So my plan was, I'm going to get a job and work for a couple years, save up some money, and then go and be a pastor. Does anyone know what happened to the electrical engineering industry in 2004? My plan fell completely apart. And of course, I ended up going to seminary and becoming a pastor. But if I'd have just trusted God in the first place instead of coming up with my own plan, things would have gone a lot better for me. And you have to wonder if things would have gone better for Naomi if she had just trusted God too. Because this chapter ends with a huge cliffhanger. And you're left not knowing, is it going to be Boaz or is it going to be this other guy? And at the end of this chapter, we don't know. The uncertainty seems to make Naomi finally realize that she can't control things. Because her response to Ruth is, well, I guess we got to just wait and see what happens. She's finally reached the point where I don't know if she's ready to trust God yet, but she definitely knows that her way isn't working. Because, especially in this story, When Naomi plans something, it goes badly. When things just so happen, they go really well. Now, even with all the drama of the story of Ruth, the time in this book it's written to a people who need to be reminded that God is trustworthy. It's written to people after they had returned from the exile in Babylon. They had just seen God's trustworthiness work in a really big way, but we know how people react in the Bible, and we know how people react still, right? As soon as God does something big, we still very quickly forget to trust him. I mean, this book is set in the time of the Judges, and the plot of the book of Judges is God does something big, the people follow him for a little bit, they stop following him, God saves them, repeat. Because that's how we are. We're always putting more trust in what we can do than in what God can do for us. And so we need stories like Ruth to remind us that God is trustworthy, that God will work things out, and he will provide for us just as he provided for Ruth and for Naomi, and just as he provided for the people when they came back from exile, just as he has provided for his people throughout all time. And that is what this section of Ruth can remind us of, that even, especially when we try to make ourselves secure, those are those times when we need to be looking to God for our security. Because he does work to bring rest and security to his people. He is the one who answers when we knock, the one who we find when we seek, and the one who will bless us and care for us, just as he has always done for his people.